The AOC Gaming CQ27G2S is very much like its predecessor, the CQ27G2U, which I previously reviewed. Indeed, these monitors both have got a resolution of 1440p, a curved VA panel, and a 27-inch form factor. However, unlike the previous model that went up to 144Hz, the new CQ27G2S has got a 165Hz refresh rate and also support for HDR. So in this video, which has been sponsored by the manufacturer, I'll be covering everything you need to know about it so that you can make your own informed purchasing decision. So to kick things off, I will like to talk about that refresh rate, and indeed 165Hz is appreciated over 144Hz, but I'll be hard pressed if anyone can really tell me the difference between the two refresh rates. However, it is worth pointing out that if you do want to achieve the maximum refresh rate and resolution, you'll have to be connected over the singular DisplayPort 1.4 input. And that's because the two HDMI 2.0 ports will limit you to 144Hz due to the bandwidth limitations of the HDMI 2.0 spec at 1440p. So with that out of the way, let's talk about its gaming performance. And here, its input lag was objectively tested at 0.5 milliseconds, which is seriously impressive. But the same could be said about the vast majority of other modern monitors that I've tested, ranging from 0 to 1.1 milliseconds, as you'll be able to see from my table. Now, I would like to point out, however, that the objective number for the CQ27G2S was attained with the low input lag mode enabled. This is an option that you can toggle on and off via the monitor's OSD. I've got no real understanding as to why you'd ever want to disable it, but it's just worth considering that you'll always want to have this option enabled. However, it is worth pointing out that if you have got adaptive sync technologies enabled, such as AMD FreeSync or NVIDIA G-Sync, the option will become grayed out. However, from my own subjective testing, it didn't seem to incur a massive increase in input lag like you'd find on some rival alternatives. So aside from its input lag, what about when it comes to its response time? Well, here you've got a few different overdrive modes that you can select from. As the higher you go, usually you'll get a worse visual experience. In other words, you'll get more inverse ghosting, but on the flip side, you'll get a faster response time. Now for me to demonstrate it, I've got the OSRTD tool. And at the bottom left-hand side of your screen, you'll be able to see the average initial time. Now this translates to average D2G, which is often quoted by manufacturers such as AOC. And in this respect, you can see that the time sits at 11.95 milliseconds with the overdrive set to off. Moving on to weak mode preset, you can see that the time decreases to 10.26 milliseconds. Going down to the medium preset, you have got 8.86 milliseconds, but the recommended mode, which I would highly suggest you to use, is the strong mode preset, and this is because the average initial time sits at 6.45 milliseconds. Now it is worth considering that the overall time isn't exactly class leading, specifically for a modern panel, and of course if you compare it to higher refresh rate monitors, but it should certainly suffice for casual gamers. I'm mentioning this because you'll be able to see that the percent in window sits at a pretty low 60%, where it should be closer to 80 to 100%. Now as for the RGB overshoot, however, it is absolutely perfect. And as you'll be able to see over here, that there is no errors that are coming up, which is actually quite surprising, specifically on the higher mode overdrives. Now for me to give you the visual experience, you can see over here the UFO ghosting test. As you go through the different overdrive modes, you can see that there is no inverse ghosting. However, you will be able to note that there is a little bit of smearing, in other words, a little bit of black trailing. This is very much occurrent on a lot of BA panels, but thankfully it's not too significant on this monitor and therefore won't actually throw you off, at least if you're not overly sensitive to VA smearing. Now you might be able to notice that there is also a boost mode preset. Now this is with the motion blur reduction technologies enabled and the strongest mode overdrive selected. This will also limit the overall brightness, but it will also give you a much clearer image, as you'll be able to see via the UFO ghosting test. Now you can also go on the strong mode preset, and as long as you have adaptive sync technologies disabled, you can also enable MBR and flick through the different 20 level increments that you have available via the OSD. This is what I would actually suggest rather than using the boost mode preset, because you've got a little bit more control in terms of the overall brightness that the monitor can emit, while also still benefiting from better motion blur reduction. So to re-emphasize, the monitor will not run MBR simultaneously with adaptive sync technologies, which is very much the case that could be said about a lot of monitors, specifically at this price point. Now in terms of the overall tear-free gaming experience, the monitor will run AMD FreeSync. However, in my case, I have got an NVIDIA RTX 3080. And when connected over DisplayPort, I was able to run NVIDIA G-Sync, at least on the NVIDIA Pendulum demo and while playing a game such as Destiny 2. However, I did notice that there was a little bit of flickering that was occurring. It was not overly severe, but just something worth noting. Of course, your setup might be different from mine, but it's just something I thought I should highlight. Furthermore, this monitor has not got a native G-Sync module and therefore is unofficially going to run on NVIDIA G-Sync, and as such has got a VR range from 48 up to 165 Hz. So aside from this, I would like to point out that the monitor is HDR compliant, and indeed has not got any sort of display HDR certifications, which is a little bit of a shame. This is due to the overall peak brightness that this monitor can attain. Nonetheless, if you're going to be using an HDR signal, it might be handy in certain scenarios. However, my personal suggestion would be to actually disable HDR and run it in SDR in any given scenario. With that in mind, it perfectly brings me on to console gaming. And here the monitor will run 120Hz at 1440p or 1080p and also 60Hz at both resolutions. Now, using the OSRT tool, I had it tested via the strong mode overdrive at 120Hz at 5.27 milliseconds, which is actually pretty good. You can see here the percent in Windows sitting at 90% is far more impressive than what I attained at 165Hz. Now, at 60Hz, there is far more RGB overshoot, but it is still perfectly acceptable, at least in my opinion, with the strong mode overdrive sitting with an average initial time of 4.59 milliseconds and the percent in window being perfect at 100%. Now, in terms of the overall visual experience, you can see over here that on the strong mode overdrive, there is more inverse ghosting at 60Hz. But you will also notice that there is still a bit of VA spearing that is occurrent both at 120Hz and 60Hz. Now, the Bose mode preset, which indeed enables you to have MBR, is present at 120Hz, but is unsurprisingly unavailable at 60Hz. Aside from all of this, I would also like to highlight that the monitor will take a 4K signal input, and therefore via my 4K Blu-ray player I was able to notice that HDR was simultaneously running at 60Hz and 4K, and therefore means that you can actually emulate a 4K signal input via a console as well. So past the overall gaming performance, what about when it comes to image quality? Well, as a reminder, you have got a curved VA panel that operates a resolution of 1440p and a refresh rate of up to 165 Hz, and you've got a matte coating to it. Now, via the monitor's OSD, you've also got a dedicated sRGB mode that you can enable, and it's also great to see that you've got full brightness controls. Now, in said mode, I had it tested via my calibrators with a gamut coverage of 97.6% and 107.7% in the sRGB standard. Below you can see how it compares to the color gamut. In terms of the overall color accuracy, it sits at 3.12 and a maximum of 5.18 in terms of its delta E, and therefore means that this monitor can't be used for some serious image editing work or video grading. On the flip side, however, the overall tested contrast ratio is seriously impressive at a whopping 3,418 to 1, while the measured white point isn't too far off at a measured 6,152 Kelvin at 100% in comparison to the 6,504 Kelvin target. As for its gamma curve, it is a little bit off from the 2.2 standards. Now, indeed, the monitor isn't exactly color accurate to the sRGB color space. And as a result, if you want to have a little bit more extra pop on your image and you're a gamer, you'll want to go on the panel native preset and the warm mode. Now, in said mode, you'll be able to see that the gamut coverage and the gamut volume in the Adobe RGB and DCI-P3 color spaces have been positively affected. Concentrating on the DCI-P3 color space, you can see that the gamut coverage sits at 88.4% and a gamut volume of 92.5%. Below you can see how it compares to the standard. As for the color accuracy, yet again it's not exactly that impressive, with an average delta E of 2.94 and a maximum delta E of 5.91, and its tested contrast ratio doesn't shift. As for its measured white point, it does slightly alter at 6,135 Kelvin at 100%, and as for its gamma curve, it actually sits a little bit closer to the required 2.6 standards. Now, I did previously talk about the brightness of this monitor, so let's actually delve into the numbers. And in HDR, I recorded a peak of 276 nits, while in SDR it does get up to 268 nits, which means it can be used in a bright sunlit room, at least if you're running it at roughly 90% brightness. As for its minimum brightness, it gets all the way down to 29 nits, showing good sort of range, and therefore means you can use it in a completely pitch black room. As for the boost mode preset, or the MBR20 mode, it will run at 74 nit, and note this is locked. Of course, you can adjust the brightness in MBR if you were to adjust between the different 20 level increments that are available in the MBR mode preset. Now, aside from peak luminance, let's talk about brightness uniformity, and here's how my tested panel performed across the board. Of course, this is somewhat panel lottery, so your panel might differ from mine. As for the overall backlight bleed, there is a little bit of clouding that is occurrent, at least on my tested panel, as you'll be able to see from the images over here. Aside from all these tests, let's talk about its build quality. Here you have got a 3-side borderless design with a relatively thin bottom bezel. Now it's worth noting that the monitor has got a 1500R curvature, which does add a slight extra bit of immersion, of course if that's something that you're looking for on a 27-inch form factor. Now the monitor's stand has got a black and red finish to it. It is also very sturdy and provides you height, tilt and swivel adjustments, although it cannot be pivoted. In other words, you cannot rotate the monitor, which is no surprise given its curvature, but just something I thought I should highlight. Now you can also replace the built-in stand if you so wish with a VESA compatible stand, allowing you to place it on a monitor arm or a multi-monitor setup. Elsewhere, the monitor has got a few physical buttons positioned at the bottom right hand side, and these allow you access to the monitor's OSD. While the buttons can be a little bit hard to press, it's great to see that the monitor's OSD itself is very comprehensively laid out and intuitive to use. Now you will also be able to notice that via the monitor's OSD that there is a volume setting. However, this is to adjust the volume output via the 3.5mm jack. Of course, you can plug in your headphones directly into the monitor. And this is because this monitor does not have any sort of built-in speakers. So there we have it. Hopefully this video has been informative and has provided you all the key information that you need to know about the AOC Gaming CQ27G2S. I'll be curious to know what you make of this 1440p curved VA monitor down the comment section below, and of course if you would pick it over some of its rivals. Now, if you have enjoyed this detailed video, definitely do consider dropping a like, subscribing and hitting that bell notification, all of which would be greatly appreciated. As such, I've been Totally Dubbed and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves and goodbye.